So what really holds the global economy together? It's not just about markets and money. There's this whole set of invisible rules. But what happens when the world's most powerful economy just decides to, well, break them? Let's find out. Okay, picture this. The year is 2025. A new administration rolls out a series of tariffs, and boom, they send these massive shockwaves through the entire global system. And look, this isn't just about politics. What we're really talking about here is a major stress test for the very rules that govern our super interconnected world.
So, let's get on the same page. What is a tariff anyway? Well, in the simplest terms, it's just a tax on stuff that's imported into a country. The whole idea is to make foreign products more expensive, right? So you're more likely to buy the stuff made right here at home. It sounds simple, but trust me, it's a tool with some seriously complex consequences.
All right, let's really dive into what this tariff shock was all about. Because this wasn't just some single, simple tax. Oh no, this was a really complex, multi-layered strategy. And its goal? To basically rewrite America's trade relationships with the entire planet.
I mean, the scale of these things was just huge. Unprecedented, really. First, you've got a flat 10% tariff on pretty much everything coming into the country. But it didn't stop there. Then they added reciprocal tariffs. We're talking up to 50% on countries that had a trade surplus with the U.S. And then, on top of all that, they slapped specific hikes on key industries like steel and cars. They even tied it to foreign policy, hitting goods from any country that was buying Venezuelan oil. It was a lot.
So, what was the official reason for doing all this? Well, the stated goals were pretty straightforward. Shrink the U.S. trade deficit and bring manufacturing jobs back home. Sounds good, right? But, as we're about to see, the actual effects were way, way more complicated.
You see, an economic shock this big, it never just stays in one place. It's like throwing a huge rock into a pond. The ripples just keep spreading. And these tariffs created immediate ripple effects all across the globe. So let's take a look at what the experts were predicting. What was the fallout going to be, both here and everywhere else?
And here's the first surprise. You might think a policy like this is designed to boost the home economy, but the first big projection was actually negative for the U.S. itself. Yeah, the Peterson Institute ran the numbers and figured that these tariffs would actually shrink the country's economic growth by more than 0.5%. Not a great start.
Okay, so what does this mean for everyday people? Well, the impact was pretty direct. Remember, a tariff is a tax, and when you tax imported goods, their price goes up. So projections showed inflation climbing by a full percentage point, and what that really means is you're paying more for things at the store. Simple as that.
Now, all that tax money has to go somewhere, right? And it did. The Tax Foundation estimated it would bring in an extra $168 billion in federal revenue. But this really highlights the key point, doesn't it? A tax on foreign goods, it's ultimately paid by the people and businesses buying those goods. It was, for all intents and purposes, one of the biggest tax hikes in decades.
And if you want to see what that looks like, just look at this chart from the OECD. It paints a really clear picture. Before the tariffs, U.S. growth was looking pretty good, projected at 2.8%. Afterwards, that forecast gets slashed, all the way down to 1.6%. That is a huge hit to the economy.
And remember those ripples we talked about? This wasn't just a U.S. problem. The IMF basically warned that the whole global economy was slowing down. All of this uncertainty, it just makes businesses nervous. They hold off on investing, and that slows down growth for everyone, and can even ratchet up the risk of a major debt crisis.
So you've got this chaos brewing. The whole global system is under a ton of strain. And you know what the real irony is? The system itself, the one we're talking about, it was built for one specific reason: to stop exactly this kind of thing from happening, to prevent these every country for itself trade wars.
Which brings us to the big question, right? If these tariffs were so disruptive, what rules were they actually breaking? What even is this system that we keep talking about?
Well, the answer lies in something called international economic law. And honestly, the best way to think about it is it's the operating system for the entire global economy, the code that's running in the background.
So what is international economic law, or IEL for short? At its core, it's the rule book. It's the set of rules that countries all agree to play by when they do business with each other. And it's not just for governments either. It also covers huge corporations and other major players. It's basically the legal backbone of globalization.
And this whole system, IEL, basically rests on three main pillars. It's pretty straightforward when you break it down. First, you've got trade. That's the rules for all the goods and services crossing borders, with the WTO as the main referee. Then there's investment. the rules for foreign companies building factories and doing business abroad. And finally, you have finance, the rules for the money itself, keeping the global financial system stable, which is where groups like the IMF and World Bank come in. Let's zoom in on two of the biggest names you just heard, the WTO and the IMF. Think of the World Trade Organization, the WTO, as the referee of global trade. Its job is to make sure everyone plays fair, to lower barriers like tariffs, and to step in when countries have a dispute. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has a totally different job. It's more like the global economy's first responder. It's paramedic, stepping in to stabilize things and help countries that are in a financial crisis.
Now, this system didn't just appear out of thin air. It was forged in the fire of global catastrophe. The groundwork was laid way back in 1944, as World War II was drawing to a close. And everyone had one clear goal: never again. They wanted to prevent the kind of destructive economic nationalism that had led to the Great Depression and ultimately to the war. So they created the IMF and the World Bank. And over the next few decades, a series of trade agreements eventually grew into the WTO that we have today.
Okay, so we've got this huge, complicated legal system running the global economy. But let's be real. Why should you care? Why does this invisible web of rules and acronyms actually matter in your day-to-day life?
Well, the reality is we live in a fundamentally globalized economy. I mean, think about it. The phone in your pocket, the coffee you drank this morning, everything is connected. Capital, supply chains, ideas, they're all zipping across borders every single second. In a world like this, the idea of just cutting yourself off, well, it just doesn't really work anymore.
And because everything is so interconnected, these economic rules have a huge impact on, well, pretty much everything. We're talking about the world's biggest challenges. Can a country block imports made with unethical labor? That's a trade rule. Can a government pass tough laws to fight climate change without being sued by a foreign company? That's an investment rule. How do we fund a global response to a pandemic? That's a finance rule. It all connects back to this system.
And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most important question. The entire architecture of our global economy, it was designed for a 20th century world. But the challenges we're facing now, climate change, pandemics, the rise of AI, these are 21st century problems. And events like that 2025 tariff shock really show the cracks in that old system. So the question is, can we update these rules for a totally new era, or are we just watching the whole thing break apart in real time?